So welcome everyone to the webinar titled Build Resiliency, Approaches to Supporting Pre-Service Teacher Wellness. My name is Trisha Zachariah and I'm the Director of Programs and Education at PHE Canada. So Teach Resiliency is a program of PHE Canada, and what I do is I support with the development and the implementation. So today my role is to present the presenters that will be sharing on the webinar and support with the delivery. So this is the fourth and final webinar in the four-part series of our Teach Resiliency Education series. At the end of the webinar, I will share the link to the other recordings of the other webinars that we have completed. And just a few administrative items before we start. So if you hadn't noticed, all participants are muted during the presentation, and I'll do my best to watch out for any logistical questions that are asked in the chat box. And I do ask for you throughout the webinar, if a question comes up as you hear something, there is a questions box, and if you type that throughout the webinar, what I will do at the end is when we have a little bit of a Q&A time, I will be able to ask those questions. And then the final thing is, I was just informed that there was an email that went out that Dr. Susan Rogers wasn't able to join us. That was actually from the last webinar. She is here with us today, so we are very excited about that. So on that note, I will present a little brief bio on each of our presenters today. So the first one is Dr. Susan Rogers, and she's a psychologist and associate professor in the Psychology Counseling Graduate Program in the Faculty of Education at Western University, and is also a research associate at the Center for School-Based Mental Health. Dr. Roger and her team have been an integral partner in the development and implementation of Teach Resiliency and continue to provide expertise and support to us. Dr. Nancy Heath is a James McGill Professor and Associate Dean of Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Education at McGill University. She has over 20 years of experience working in the area of mental health in schools in active collaboration with school boards, educators, and leaders across Canada and internationally. She has long-standing experience in the development of skills-based training programs and online outreach for teachers and school staff. Furthermore, she has extensively published and presented at national and international conferences in the area. And last but not least, we have Carrie Murray, who is the Director of Programs with Everactive Schools, a provincial initiative in Alberta that aims to improve health and learning outcomes of students. Carrie has a background in health physiology and experience in public health and health promotion in schools using a comprehensive school health framework. So we're very excited to have these presenters with us today. Our agenda for the webinar, we'll just start with a brief little piece around teaching and stress, and then we'll move into hearing from Dr. Heath about the development, implementation, and evaluation of our pre-service teachers stress management and resilience program. And then we'll hear from Carrie about the Teachers of Tomorrow initiative, advancing wellness in advanced education, and then finally some Q&A. So before we dive into it, just for those of you that are not aware really of what Teach Resiliency is, a really brief overview. What it is it's an online portal that offers educators simple to use strategies and tools to assess resilience needs and provide resources to promote and enhance both teacher and student mental health. It was developed in partnership with PHE Canada, Western University, and the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. What it's designed to do is to develop, enhance, and support teacher competencies, also to enhance and support mental health literacy for teachers, offer effective and practical strategies to support child and youth resiliency and mental health, and again, offer effective and practical strategies to support teacher resiliency and wellness. So what you do see there on the screen is the 4 themes of the resources that are available on the site. Right now, there are about 175 English resources and 45 French resources available on Teach Resiliency. So these are things from podcasts to tip sheets, programs, and more, and we continue to add new resources. The resources are developed by the team of educators, mental health professionals, and health education leaders. They are curated according to guidelines and a review process that include that they're free or low cost, they're evidence-based or a promising practice, they are made available to teachers, and that they're of high quality. So I'm going to pass it over to Susan. Susan, I'm going to unmute your line now to talk to us a little bit about teaching and stress.
All right, thanks very much, Tricia. I'm thrilled to be part of this panel along with you and Nancy and Carrie, because I think this is such an important topic. And when we teach at the Bachelor of Education level, I think it's also important to kind of contextualize it, because what we're doing here is not only providing education and leadership and guidance around the curriculum, the pedagogy, the philosophy, but we're also helping people understand what their job is and what they can expect from their job. And when we have a poor fit between expectations and experience, it can be quite stressful for people. So part of what we try to do is help people understand what they can expect, the good parts, the not so good parts, and the parts they have some control over. So see, these are some of the things that we talk about in the course that I teach, a mandatory course in mental health for all of our teacher education candidates, that, there really isn't an on-ramp. People are expected to be able to do their job independently right from the beginning, and they're often facing some isolation. The opportunities, though, are wonderful. Those relationships that they build with students and families over time and in the context of that community allow for a great deal of interconnection and a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, a sense of mutual growth as we as teachers influence the lives of students and they influence our lives. It can be a wonderful thing. We also talk about the difficulties in terms of work intensification, because I think in general what we see in teaching is that there's an increasing responsibility for teachers, increasing expectations for what they can achieve. But in many cases, there is a reduction in the resources, at least the traditional kinds of resources that would be made available. So, of course, that can lead to some high levels of stress. We also see that there are fewer opportunities to actually talk about this sort of stuff, either in initial teacher education or in professional development. And, of course, it has to be said that, these days, talking about wellness is connected with talking about job opportunities, job security. Here in Ontario, we've got a lot of job action on the horizon, a lot of uncertainty for teachers, and all of these things will likely increase stress and reduce wellness. And when all of these things happen too, then teachers are subject to public perceptions of what their role might be like. So there's lots of reasons to talk about it, and we're excited to be talking about it here today. So if we can have the next slide, please. Some of the research we did a couple of years ago now was really focusing on what are the things that people find stressful in the teaching role? And we can see the dark highlighted bars there were the top contenders for stressful experiences: work-life balance, working within a policy framework, having not enough resources, and having responsibilities at work that outstrip a person's perceived resources. And these are pretty important because they give us some ideas about what we can do to help, because in the main, right, we're looking at how we can be that caring adult and how we can care for ourselves so that we can be that caring adult in the life of a child. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, so, and one of the things it really brings up for us is this notion of emotional labor. So what we see, certainly with anybody in the helping profession, and, teachers are one of those helping professions, is that we get into this profession because we want to help, because we want to do good, because we want to create good for others. But then we can find ourselves in a system that doesn't always support the kind of work we want to do. We can be expected to work within a system that doesn't support our values for helping, for wellness, for taking care of children, and we can try to reconcile these mismatches by internalizing it. So feeling like we're not good enough, feeling like what we do isn't good enough, feeling like the way that we're expected to respond in a situation isn't the way we would really like to respond. So that's what we call emotional labor. The next slide, please. So there are some ways that, people can typically respond to these kinds of stressors. People are probably pretty familiar with the term teacher burnout, and that really is a combination of a number of things. These researchers, Maslach and colleagues, define it as a combination of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, being cynical about our ability to make a difference, and feeling not very effective or efficacious at it. And again, this is something that's experienced by people across the helping professions, and it really is about this prolonged, chronic kind of experience where we just don't feel like we're able to do much. But if you'll go to the next slide, here's the thing that I'd like to talk about just as I close here, and that is flipping the script, or what we call cognitive reframing. Because we know that language is so important with how we process, how we deal with a difficult situation. And when we talk about burnout, we put ourselves in a down position, in a deficit position, because it leads us to focus on what's wrong. It contributes to more negative thinking and more stress, because we talk about burnout, we talk about how burned out we are. But wonder, what people would think happens when we flip that to burning in and we focus on what's going right, and we think positively and with resilience. And in this way, I don't mean that we should ignore the difficulties and the challenges, for sure, but especially at a systems level. And I go back to that slide about what causes or what the main causes of stress were, and the things about policy and the things about responsibility. We can't change those. So let's think about them in a little bit of a different way, and think about focusing on what's right, thinking about positive thinking and resilience, and what we can do for ourselves to flip that script. And if you go to the last slide I have here, please, Tricia, you'll see this wonderful quote about this very idea, because I think it's important to remember that the people who are most prone to burnout are not those who are the least committed, because you can't actually burn out if you've never been a light. The ones who burn out are often those who care the greatest and who give the most. And so as a member of a helping profession, if we want to continue to care the greatest and give the most, we have to focus on our own wellness so that we're always in a position to do that. And this quote, I think, is just a really good reminder of that. So thanks a lot. That's my piece.
Thanks so much, Susan. So I'm going to move on to our next presenter, Dr. Heath, and who's going to share some information with us around pre-service teacher stress management. So you are now unmuted.
Thank you very much, Tricia. I want to second what Susan was saying, that I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to talk to people about what we're doing, because an important part of what we're doing is we're wanting to share this across the country. And you'll see that as I come to the end, where I'm really going to highlight what people can do in terms of reaching out to us and getting involved in this if they so choose. So this is really, I'm going to talk very briefly about a program that we've developed. We've really run it, we've implemented it, and we've evaluated it here in our B.Ed program at McGill. And it was aimed, Susan acknowledged sort of the system issues, the policy issues that really impact teachers negatively in terms of their wellness. And we 100% recognize and acknowledge those. But this particular program called REST is really about helping pre-service teachers as they prepare to enter the profession to regulate their emotions and stress in the pre-service teachers. So we call it REST. And I want to tell you sort of how that went. Now, let me see if I'm not, Tricia, being able to see the option of going to the next slide. Ah, there we go. Perfect. It should work now. There. So this project was funded by the Rossi Foundation, and we started way back in sort of spring 2017. In fall of 2017, we did a needs assessment with major stakeholders, so pre-service teachers, in-service teachers, school administrators, and faculties of education across Canada, about really what did pre-service teachers need to know to really strengthen their own resilience within individual so that they could better handle the stressors and perhaps advocate for change in the system. In winter 2018, we developed a skills-based pre-service teacher stress and well-being program drawing on the needs assessment as well as the literature in the area. And there are a number of people involved in this. It's based in the Faculty of Education at McGill, but we have collaborators, Susan's one of them, as well as elsewhere in the US and overseas. Then in winter 2018-19, so that year, we piloted the program and we evaluated it, and we shared some of that information across Canada and elsewhere. Now, right at this time, over the summer and in the spring of last year, we revised it based on our feedback and what we saw, and now we're delivering it again, the final REST program, with the goal of, in this coming winter, we're going to be sharing this with universities across Canada so they can try it, and we're going to evaluate with them sort of how is it working there. So let me tell you a little bit about the program and the needs assessment. I'm still not seeing, can I just have the next slide, Trish? Okay, perfect. Clearly I need to say next slide, thanks. So the needs assessment with all the stakeholders, it really came together showing when we asked within individual resilience. So recognizing system issues, but focusing on how do we build resilience within the teacher. All of them came together saying, first of all, strategy-based, really skills-based, more than psychoeducation, more than just information about wellness, but actual skills. Something that came up, which is dear to my heart, but I didn't actually expect participants to be saying this, but they were. They talked about mindfulness, to learn more to be mindful and be in the moment. And they suggested that really it needed to be a required course. It shouldn't be optional because not everyone knows that they need it. The other main points that we drew out of this when we then decided, okay, we need to develop the program, is that it needed to have a real basis with mindfulness, that there needed to be some self-care around general wellness as well as work-life balance was a separate issue. Stress management around behavioral issues of the students, which I think a lot of us understand where that's coming from, and time management issues. So what we did with this is we created the REST pilot program. The basis of it was emotion regulation, which is really managing your emotions, and a key component of this was mindfulness. And then the pillars were really self-care, self-compassion, managing one's self-criticism, because a lot of teachers in service and pre-service indicated their own excessively high expectations of themselves, as Susan talked about, really led to additional stressors. Self-awareness and social connectedness. We did this very much using an educational model. The program is educational in nature. So it was a total of 12 hours delivered once a week. And the session components were a learning objective, discussion and reflection questions, practicing the strategies. And then we also had experienced teachers, a diversity of experienced teachers who were on video, talking about their own experience of difficulties in these areas as well as how they handled it. We even had homework at that point. So what happened with this? Well, we had a program satisfaction with 56% of the B.Ed students, and this was mandatory, agreed that the program presented valuable strategies and techniques. We were pleased to see this given that about 30% of the students we know are struggling with their own wellness as students, and about another 30% are sort of borderline struggling, and then the remaining 30-something% usually don't really identify with having significant issues around stress and wellness. So we thought it was okay, but we felt we could do better. It was the pilot. When we asked the question about strategy use at this time with the pilot, what we saw was that about 45% said they'd continue using the strategies. And these were not strategies that pre-service teachers had been exposed to before for the most part. This was things like progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness body scan, using a gratitude journal. They knew of them sometimes, but they hadn't used them. So we thought this was encouraging, but we thought we could do better. Then in terms of recommending the program, again, we saw that same approximate percentage of around 45% saying they would recommend this to other pre-service teachers. So you can see a pattern where we're getting consistently around 45, 50, 55% really engaging with the REST program and saying it's worthwhile. In terms of including it in the B.Ed program, we had that same approximate number, about 42%, saying yes, they would want this as a mandatory part of the B.Ed curriculum. But what about the program effectiveness, not their satisfaction with the program? What we saw, we did a comparison group, which was the previous year, that did not receive the program. And what we saw is that the REST program on a standardized anxiety measure pre-post, the REST program did significantly decrease, whereas the comparison didn't. The REST program significantly increased on a score of mental health overall well-being, and we didn't think to measure in the comparison the positive experience of positive emotion, but we did for the REST, and we saw a significant increase. So this was very encouraging for a universal program that was mandatory. So it wasn't selection bias where people want to do it. They were really required to do it. So obviously not all were feeling they needed it per se. But we really felt we could do better than this. So what we did is based on detailed feedback, and here's some of what you see, the positive feedback, qualitative, both in written, and we also did some focus groups and interviews. I really enjoyed the REST program and felt its benefit. I recommend it to all pre-service teachers and even other programs. I appreciated the variety of strategies taught during this program, and I believe this to be an extremely important and relevant program for not only pre-service teachers, but for everyone, which is, we thought, a good point. But using this, what we did is we actually revised the program because that first round was a pilot. And I'll tell you some of the changes we made that are really lessons learned for us going forward. One is that 30% of pre-service teachers who really did not identify with having significant stress or mental health challenges or other difficulties, for them, they felt this was not good use of their time. It was a mandatory piece of the program, and they felt they could have used it better elsewhere. However, when we did interviews and reframed it and said, okay, let's not focus, originally we focused really primarily on helping you as a pre-service teacher deal with your own stress as you enter a demanding profession. We reframed it and said, okay, maybe you do or do not personally have stress or difficulties managing stress. However, your students do. And we shared the research about how students are struggling with wellness in the schools. So we made a new focus on your own within teacher resilience, but also using these exact strategies to really address your students' wellness. The other thing you'll notice, especially for PHE Canada, that was very interesting to us is self-care was not well responded to. So we actually removed self-care because they felt they were getting that message repeatedly. They needed to take care of themselves, exercise, eat well, get enough sleep. And yet they were in a context where they felt they did not have the ability to engage in self-care. So we didn't make it a separate element, we embedded it. The actual format for how we changed it was a little bit different. Tricia, I'm having difficulty with the next slide. Could you please? Thank you. So we shortened it because we felt that our B.Ed program felt it was too long. We shortened it by 4 hours. And we cycled back and forth between knowledge about the strategies, practicing the strategies, both for themselves and for their students in the classroom. A much bigger emphasis on the students. What we saw is a significant increase in program satisfaction, up to 84%, which was very encouraging. We saw in terms of strategy use, even for themselves, we saw a significant increase in terms of 77% now saying they would use the strategies. In terms of recommending the program, again, we saw a big increase, 81% saying they would use it. And inclusion in the B.Ed program, we saw 57% saying that they felt that this should be included because it was more helpful than other material covered in the B.Ed. And as you can see in some of the statements that they gave us, what was really appreciated is that the inclusion of the students as well. Every session encompassed theory and practice and was relevant to the needs of pre-service teachers, given the demands in both their professional and personal lives. Sessions were good because you can also use the strategies with your students. This is helpful. So it was really important for them to have that student piece put in. I should mention one other change that we did make is the first time with the REST pilot, we wanted it's got to be shared across Canada easily. So we gave a single 40-minute training session to regular instructors in the B.Ed who had no background in this area whatsoever. And we sent them out to do this on their own. They really liked doing it and really were very engaged, even those who were resistant at the first. But we feel that there's more training that's needed. The second time with this one, we had people that were associated with my team who had more detailed training and more background in sort of wellness, which suggests as we spread it across Canada, that we need instructors who have a little more background in the area, or we give a little more training. So in conclusion, first of all, short skills-based training to enhance pre-service teacher well-being, that is really promising. There are a lot of programs out there on mental health literacy and also approaching sort of a system change, but to actually teach specific strategies to deal with the stressors day to day seems to be extremely well received by pre-service teachers. The combined teacher-student focus, again, also better received, and you see more use by everyone. One lesson learned, which is not news to anyone, but it has to be addressed really explicitly. The first time around, we addressed the fact that elementary teachers and secondary teachers have very different needs and very different experiences around the stress of teaching. But in the second round, we made it so explicit at every step, because the first time, although we thought it was quite clear, the participants did not pick up on the fact that we were differentiating elementary teaching and secondary. So the second time we had to make it extremely explicit, and ideally teaching them in separate groups, although that's not always possible. And then the other thing that we have learned from this, that going forward we're doing here at McGill, is students really ask that we integrate this throughout the program, not just this one program, but have a foundation in the first year and build on that in the second year if you have multiple years, so that it's not a here's a course and that's it. And I think that's an excellent lead into what you're going to be talking about, Carrie. So that's it. And I'm just going to add again, if anyone is interested in getting more information or being part of this as we unroll it across Canada, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dr. Heath. And so I'm just going to remind everyone, again, if you have a question, something that you want to ask, please write it in that question box. And especially now that the information is fresh in your mind. So we're going to move on to hear a little bit about Teachers of Tomorrow. So Carrie, I'm going to unmute you now. So you're unmuted.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to Dr. Heath and Dr. Roger for their words as well. Like the previous presenters, I'm very pleased to be here today. And as Tricia mentioned, I come from a health promotion background. I've worked in health promotion for the entirety of my career. I started in the private side of health promotion and very quickly moved to the public side because of the potential for population health impact. And my experience comes from a practitioner in the K-12 setting. So I've been working in comprehensive school health, or to facilitate a comprehensive school health approach in K-12 settings for a long time. And this was a really unique opportunity to be able to apply that to the post-secondary setting. So today I'd like to just share a few insights that we've had about the pre-service teacher population. I'll chat a little bit about the insights that we've heard from pre-service teachers themselves, and then finish with some examples of how Bachelor of Education programs are supporting well-being for their pre-service teachers, and we've just heard two excellent examples of that already. I wanted to acknowledge that I'm grateful to present on behalf of a talented team of people who are behind this work that I'll share today. And I'd like to, there have been so many people involved over the years, but I especially wanted to acknowledge Dr. Shelley Russell-Mayhew from the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary, and my colleagues at Ever Active Schools, Louise McClelland and Dana Fulweiler, who are both working currently on this content. So the partnership between the Workland School of Education and Ever Active Schools started about 10 years ago, and late in 2017 we were awarded a Student Wellbeing for Systems Change grant from the McConnell Foundation, the Well Ahead division there. So about 10 years ago, Dr. Russell Mayhew at the Body Image Research Lab out of University of Calgary's Faculty of Education had been hosting optional learning opportunities for teacher candidates in the undergraduate program. And Ever Active Schools has offices on campus, so our resources for teachers and experience in facilitating that comprehensive school health approach meant that we were natural allies on this work. That optional learning opportunity eventually grew and became a comprehensive school health and wellness course that is now a requirement for an undergraduate degree in education at the Workland School of Education. We concentrated our efforts in Alberta, and you'll hear a lot about that today. And that's because there's potential to align with the provincial curriculum and policy. And we started working with the University of Alberta, the University of Lethbridge, and Concordia University of Edmonton to adopt a similar process of comprehensive school health within their education faculties. We also wanted to scale this work across Canada within our means, and I'll just touch on that briefly. So we've learned a lot over time, and we wanted to begin by sharing some of what that has meant. So the first thing we learned was that these are parallel settings. So our experience from working in the K-12 setting on health promotion, we were able to transfer to the post-secondary setting. And we did so by drawing these parallels. So when we're working at the school authority level in the K-12 system, that's very similar to working campus-wide or doing health promotion campus-wide. When we think of the school level in the K-12 setting, that's much the same as a faculty. So when we're working with the Faculty of Education or the Faculty of Kinesiology or the Faculty of Social Work, that's like working at individual schools in the K-12 setting. The principal is much like the dean, and they operate at a decisional level very similarly. The teachers and staff in the K-12 setting become the faculty members and staff in the post-secondary setting, and the students are the same in both. So the second thing we learned was that they're not parallel at all, but actually that wellness is a continuum in these settings. So in the K-12, generally, people will attend their education in the K-12 setting. They will attend post-secondary, and then they will go on to a professional setting. And we wanted to make sure that participants or students would be experiencing wellness across that education continuum from K-12 to post-secondary. The third thing we learned was that it's not a continuum at all, but it's actually a perfect circle when we're looking at teachers, pre-service teachers and teacher candidates specifically. So they come from the K-12 setting, then they go to the post-secondary setting and return to the K-12 setting in their professional experience. This leads us to a paradox. Trish, oh, I think I got it. So this leads us to this paradox here, which is the upstream downstream paradox. Coming at this from the practitioner in health promotion in K-12, we realized that we were working upstream. So every table we were sitting at, people were saying, when can we get this into teacher education programs? So we felt very self-congratulatory. That's us working at the upstream level. So here's all the problems in K-12, and here we are working way up the stream. What we were doing was aiming to close that critical practice gap between what teachers are prepared for in Bachelor of Education programs and what's expected of them in practice. However, we were also looking at this from a teacher well-being perspective, in that working towards improved well-being is an upstream strategy where we're enhancing personal and professional capacity, and that can assist in the prevention of future health concerns for pre-service teachers and their future students. But as we keep learning, the stream looks actually much more like this. So when we view teacher candidates as teachers, we are working upstream. But when we're viewing teacher candidates as students, we are actually working downstream. This crystallized for us quite a few weeks ago now when we were speaking with campus mental health services, and in their strategic plan, they're aiming to make more connections in the K-12 system as an upstream approach to their work. So this is because students are arriving in advanced education settings already with conditions, mindsets, or capacities that could have been supported further up the stream in K-12 education. This is also the place that has an added level of impact. So in fact, it's not so much all the problems, but here we are working at the place with all the opportunity. The reality is that teacher candidates are both early teachers and advanced students. And it's because of this dual role that makes working with faculties of education so full of opportunity. Here, there's an added layer of impact because we can influence the learning environment of teacher candidates and the learning environment for their future students. So now for some insights from pre-service teachers themselves. The context for most of these insights comes from the course at the University of Calgary, and there's required coursework, as I mentioned before. We're now 2 years into that as a mandatory component of their undergraduate degree. The course is called Education 551, and to date, just over 1,000 teacher candidates have experienced 39 hours of instruction each. This format is done in an intensive block week format, very similar to a conference, and then it's followed by 5 weeks of lecture and lab series. And here are some of the content areas that you can see are included as part of that course. We have teacher and staff well-being integrated throughout the course itself. Some findings from yet unpublished research indicate that pre-service teachers, when they're assessed before and after the course, have increased value for comprehensive school health, increased self-efficacy to teach it, increased self-efficacy for a few other specific areas, such as dating violence and facilitating healthy relationships. And they have decreased body image concerns and decreased weight stigma as well. So the other data coming out of this course at the University of Calgary comes from the last assignment in the course, where teacher candidates are asked to reflect on their experiences and write a letter to their future teacher selves. We invited students to submit this for analysis, and 3 of the common themes are outlined here. So anticipating burnout, possible attrition from the profession, and that there were exaggerated expectations. I'll draw your attention to the quotes on the right side there. And these are directly from the letters that the teachers submitted, the teacher candidates submitted. So we'll address each of these common themes as they came up. The first one was anticipatory burnout narratives. So this narrative was prevalent throughout the program, and we drew findings from the body of literature around anticipatory grief. So we suspect that expecting significant stress can lead to anticipatory stress or burnout in pre-service teachers. So Bachelor of Education students are already feeling cynical about their profession and anticipate a threat of burnout. Another theme was teacher attrition, and what we discovered was that the narratives in teacher attrition were often conflated with burnout. So the discussions that were happening within the faculty throughout the program, and even mirrored in society, was that the discussions on attrition didn't include other reasons for leaving the profession, and that also today's teachers are showing more attachment to the field when the numbers for returning teachers are taken into account. The quote here says, "In our first lecture, pre-service teachers buzzed with excitement and purpose. The person welcoming us to our new paths told us all, 25% of you will not remain in this field after the first 5 years. I was crushed." So again, these were just it was an open invitation for students to reflect on their experience. We weren't inviting thoughts or reflections on narratives of burnout or attrition, but they really did come through quite strongly. And Taylor Del Bianco is a student from the University of Alberta in the education program. She was invited to speak on a panel that was co-facilitated, co-moderated by 2 deans of education recently. And here's what she said. "There's a common narrative of mutually endured suffering going into our practicums, and I was stressed about the stress going into my practicum. That doesn't sit well with me. Both of my practicums have been incredible, and I didn't need to be that stressed. Changing up the narrative would be helpful." So that goes back to what Dr. Roger was talking about in terms of there's a drive for students and a recognition for Bachelor of Education students to want to burn in, or to really look at what drew them to the profession and how this narrative can be shifted. So now we'll feature a few examples of how Bachelor of Education programs are working to support their pre-service teacher. As I mentioned, you just heard 2 really clever examples of how that's being done. And we're going to focus on a few different elements of each. So this is Dr. Jennifer Tupper at the University of Alberta. If we're to summarize the activities at the University of Alberta to support their pre-service teacher well-being, it would really be in that comprehensive school health pillar around policy. So they're taking, they're really looking strategically at what's written in their plans throughout the faculty, and they're doing environmental scans and program scans in order to assess that. They have a committed team of health champions with committed leadership, and they've done some recent coordinated professional learning events for their students. Part of that included a full afternoon of student focus groups where the students felt really heard from in their faculty and able to influence their pathway at the post-secondary education level. This is Dr. Edgar Schmidt at the Concordia University of Edmonton, and this, the work at this school is really happening under the voice of student leadership or pre-service teacher leadership. So there are many representatives on their wellness committee that are students, and the students drove the development of a survey to collect data from their peers. So they wanted to know about their experience in the faculty and what they could do to support that. They've also hosted a variety of learning events for their first year students and are currently in an action planning stage where they're focusing on that, what they've heard from the students around social and physical environments. Tricia, could you advance the slide for me? Thank you. This is Dr. Danny Balderson, who's the Assistant Dean at the University of Lethbridge. And this group has a Health Champions Committee or a wellness team that's operating at the faculty level with really diverse participation. They're really taking an embedded approach in terms of the teaching and learning content. So they're threading content throughout the program for their teacher candidates. And one thing that was really interesting that they had done was to take a look at staff and faculty well-being in order to generate conversation around what it means to be well. So I have an example of what they have done, and I'll flip through these slides fairly quickly, but this was the faculty wellness profiles that they had developed. So they had invited all manner of staff, alumni, teacher, faculty, to talk about what wellness meant to them and what they did to sustain their own well-being. What they got was a wide variety of interpretations of wellness. So you'll see throughout as we go, walking, running, fly fishing, but we did have some that attended to many dimensions of well-being as well. So mountain therapy, there's meditation in here, volunteerism. So these wellness profiles, they've been featured on screens that are posted throughout the faculty, and they'll also be featured in the alumni magazine from the faculty, which will reach 6,500 in-service teachers to help stimulate the conversation around well-being. And they are also profiled in the campus-wide communications now as a shining example of what the staff and faculty are doing to promote well-being and having a trickle effect within the students attending their program. So as I mentioned, this is a growing movement. These are the institutions that have connected in some way and expressed interest to connect in their efforts around promoting teacher and staff well-being through their pre-service teacher programs. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those sites if there are questions about them, but I think I will turn it back over to you, Tricia, for questions.
Perfect, thanks so much. So I'm just going to take a minute and see if we have questions. I guess for one of the questions to start with is, oh, sorry, and I just 1 second, I'm going to make sure that you are all unmuted. So I think one question that's coming up is that message around, burnout versus burn-in, and I saw it throughout, mentions of cynicism. And so is there anything more that anyone can share around, how can you really affect that systems change or strategies that looks at that burn-in and working at that faculty level? Can anyone speak to that?
I can jump in here. So at the University of Calgary, because this narrative was noticed, there's been efforts to just make that known throughout the faculty. So this was one assignment in a single course, but now it's being profiled in the Wellness Committee, and the Wellness Committee has set this as a goal to counter that narrative. And one way to counter that narrative is really to provide that information to the other instructors and faculty members that are sometimes reinforcing that narrative around burnout, and they can start to examine their own teaching practices around how the profession is framed.
Perfect.
I think from our end here at McGill, there are a couple of ways we're addressing that. One is part of the REST program is the experienced teachers speaking in a video. And our participants, our students, have found this really helpful because they do talk explicitly about that idea that, coming into the profession with all of these statistics about burnout, that it can be very daunting, but consistent with the program that we do, they really orient it as, that's not necessarily the case, and that a lot of it is how you navigate and what you do and your own resilience coming into the situation. So the idea is empowering them as they go forward. But in terms of the direct narrative, that's so embedded into the faculties, it can be challenging.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too, as Carrie mentioned, that the one slide where you said that, the quote that 25% of you will not remain. And so it also made me think about, and it's kind of come up a little bit around, Nancy, you spoke about it as well, in terms of like facilitators themselves being trained. So we're working with the B.Ed students who will become classroom teachers, but also the B.Ed faculty as well. So that's a really interesting piece, and how that narrative can keep moving along with these programs. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's important, at least in our findings there, to decouple the narratives of burnout and attrition. I think that's often conflated, and that the message here is that the stories told about a profession matter. So it's all well-meaning to be preparing students, pre-service teachers, for what they'll experience in the field, but instead we may be priming them for burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So one question that's come in, I think it's specific to REST, is, were there any responses that were related to the challenges or demands of the program itself that needed to be addressed? Like, so, I mean, the B.Ed program, that were actually being presented as forms of stress for the students?
In terms of our needs assessment, yes, certainly the pre-service teachers, the students did identify training, like as in the actual program at the undergraduate, being demanding. But we were specifically asking, the way we had framed those needs assessment questions were really, what do you anticipate being the stressors as you move into the profession? But definitely they did identify that. And if the question is also asking, what about actually participating in the REST program, like you're actually learning these skills to better manage stress and regulate your emotion, is that difficult as well? In fact, we know that that can be challenging or aversive in some instances, and some participants indicated that initially, they found it uncomfortable or challenging until they had the opportunity to practice.
Perfect. Thank you. There was one there is a question. I can actually answer this one, but anyone else feel free to jump in. But someone's asking for what types of programs are available for in-service. So we do know that there's some school boards or districts across the country that have initiatives happening, whether that be wellness kind of coordinators that will go to schools. They will have counseling support. We also know of organizations like EdCan that is doing great work around supporting in-service teachers and their stress and what they can do to kind of to work to be their best self as well in terms of wellness. So there is work, as well as our previous webinar was on talking about teacher wellness. And so that also talks about some of the resources, and I will share in a few minutes where you can access that webinar. And so I think I'm just looking at time here. This question is probably a really great final question. Someone wants to know, how can we get more institutions involved? How can we get more people involved? Is there a way that they can connect, or what could they do moving forward?
For our program, anyone who emails the email that's in there, Amanda Argento, who is the program coordinator, we're linking up with other faculties of education, anyone who wants to, and we will share all the materials and consult through the process of using the program as best fits your context.
Perfect.
And for us at the Teachers of Tomorrow project that's funded by Well Ahead, we are currently seeking to support 5 additional schools or faculties of education across the country. So that call for expression of interest is open now. And you can email my colleague Louise. Her email address is on the slide deck at the end of the presentation. And that's one way, at least, to approach well-being from an institutional level and look at crafting local priorities for faculties of education and how they can undergo change that way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm just looking at our time, so I will wrap up with just a couple more pieces of information. So, as I said, this is our 4th and final webinar in this series. You can access the other webinars. You can see on your screen the titles, and there's a link that would bring you to the webpage where the recordings of those webinars are, should you want to find out more information. And on the screen there now you see my email as well as Dr. Rogers' email. If you want any information, if there's any questions that we did not get to, I will check them and I will reach out, and if needed to follow up with Nancy or Carrie, I can. I did want to thank everyone for attending today, as well as our amazing presenters for coming on and sharing the initiatives that they're working on. So what's going to happen within the next day, you will receive an email from the webinar service with the recording, as well as a link to fill out a short feedback survey. The survey will take only about 2 to 5 minutes to complete. And if you do complete it, you have a chance to win one of 4 $100 gift cards to Chapters Indigo if you fill it out. We do want to really hear back from everyone and get some feedback on the webinar series. And the draw will be held on December 2nd. So on that note, I do want to say thank you again to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.